Good morning. Okay, I was telling Tom and Jeannie that how much I enjoy Curtis. If you haven't met Curtis before, I think probably most of you have. He just bubbles with joy in the morning, so I can see why you love coming to church on Sundays. He is a joy, and I'm excited for him to come back. I'm going to go ahead, and because we're reading the book of Peter, it's a letter. So I'm going to go ahead and remind us of some of the things that we've touched base on, some of the things that we've learned along the way. Because Peter is a good writer, he reinforces what he's saying all along. He acknowledges that the folks that he's writing to, and for us today, that we are going through trials and tensions, and that this is normal for the lives of believers. He wants them to know that these struggles are not surprising, and in fact, they are part of actually living out the family of God. He reminds them that knowing who they are and who they belong to is the perspective that allows them to trust and rejoice and be able to have that joy at the end of the day when it's been hard. And as a family, he reminds us, no relational power plays, get rid of ill deceit, all those things that he said to get rid of, the ways that we kind of play out power within families. He tells us that we as a people ought to be peculiar and to reflect more the character of God than the character of the world. All of this is familiar, right? And we have become this people as a witness to who God is. And this witness looks like honoring everyone, loving other believers as family, and fearing God as the one who judges rightly. So about honoring everyone, like Jesus, we are to submit by doing good. We do good by trying to reflect what we know is true of God, when we show the value of others as God values them, and when we seek to serve, to lay down our lives and trust God as judge. So this is where we left last week. So I'm curious, and I said to you all, I need you to help me to understand, what does it mean to do good? What does it mean to submit by doing good? So I'm curious, how was your last week? Did you have an experience? Did you feel like you learned something? Did you feel like you weren't sure and the whole week just passed by and now you're here and it's Sunday again? Okay, so just think. I'm not going to make you talk to each other. But I want to know, at some point, I should have asked Tom earlier, because I was like, I wonder what it's like for him to submit by doing good. Like, what did he experience this week that may have elicited those questions for him? Who felt like you learned something or had an opportunity to and maybe missed it? The submit by doing good, even at the cost of ourselves, this at the very least does not feel natural, at least not for me. To do this for somebody I'm responsible for, like my children, that feels hard enough to submit by doing good for them. But when it's somebody who's in authority, whose leadership I'm frustrated with or confused by, in these situations, I find I want to let them know that I know better. That I want to let them know just how much their leadership is not actually helping. And I want to usually bail or jump ship before it's too late. Really, when you get down to it, I want to blame them for my own fears that the situation isn't going to work out. Have you had that kind of an experience where you have somebody who's leading you and you're like, they're not doing the best job? Okay, that was my week this week. This is my nature, is that I want to cut bait and run, or jump ship. I got too many metaphors going on. This is my nature, but this is not what it is to follow Jesus. Following Jesus is submitting by doing good, even when it's at a cost to us. And this week, I had this situation arise, and somebody wiser than me said to me, I want to help you draw up a battle plan for this situation, because it's a big deal, a big thing that's going on. He's like, we got to figure out how to attack this. And he asked me, what is this leader's clearest felt need? And how can you speak to that first? So, what is this person's clearest felt need? And how can I be attentive to their felt need, even though I disagreed with that being the most important thing? And when I thought about that, I realized that I needed to do this for her success and for mine. As I worked from this perspective, rather than my own frustrations and fears, I found that I could honor her. And that yes, thinking this way would probably work out. It would take more work for me because it meant I had to reorient my game plan around what she felt like she needed most. But it totally shifted, right? The way that I was approaching the situation. I felt the personal cost because it takes my brain longer to think through other ways of doing things. But that in this way, I could actually submit to her authority and do good. I could help the project move forward in the ways that I thought it would. And it wasn't until I was talking to Nate later, my husband, Nate, later in the day, that I realized that that was actually what was happening. I was like, oh, so this thing happened, and my boss told me that I should really think about what is her felt need, and even though I don't think that's important, I realized, oh, if I can help her know that she's heard and that she's valued, then I can probably get my needs. Wait a second. I was like, oh, Nate, 1 Peter's doing a number on me. I'm learning how to submit by doing good. Wouldn't it be great if we had people around us who helped remind us of those things? Like my boss said to me, consider how to approach this differently, Jen. How can you submit by doing good? Wouldn't it be great if we had people around us to encourage us to make good choices? Peter totally agrees. We start in verse 8 and 9. Finally, all of you be of one mind, sympathetic, lovers of your fellow believers, compassionate and modest in your opinion of yourselves. All of you here in this community together, be of one mind. No, Peter does not mean that we all agree, thank goodness, because that would be tough. He knows that we're going to disagree, but what does it mean to be of one mind? It means that we're all trying to figure out together how to honor everyone, how to love the family of believers, and how to fear God. And sure, it would be annoying if every time you said you were frustrated with your boss or somebody else or the person on the phone or whatever said, so how are you submitting by doing good? Yes, that would be definitely annoying. But Peter goes on because he says this type of community also needs to be sympathetic, lovers of your fellow believers, and compassionate. Each of these descriptors implies a felt bond, a heart-level connection. And isn't that what we need when we come in frustration? We don't need just the corrective of think about it this way, but we need the heart. We need to be heard. We need each other to hear what it is that our felt need is as well, and then call us and compel us to follow Jesus more sacrificially than is in our nature. We need people to remind us who we are and where we belong and the big picture. You are loved, you are chosen, you are wanted. And in this, Peter also reminds us to be modest in our opinion of ourselves. This means to voluntarily submit to one another and to offer ourselves as we do this. So when we come into a room where even just a few people in the room are doing this, suffering for good, submitting by doing good is possible because we're not alone. Nobody wants to feel like they're the only person who's trying to figure this out. We need each other, and God's design is for us to be with each other. Calling a friend this week, I wanted to talk about some challenges that I was having, and I started out by thanking her for her honesty. Several months back when she was in a big transition, she was struggling with some things. And she called me and said, I need to talk this out. I want to tell you what's going on in my heart. And it was very vulnerable. And I realized that I felt the freedom to call her this week and share some stuff that I thought was hard to share because she had been vulnerable. She said sometimes, and I really appreciated this, she said sometimes we need less accountability and more vulnerability. There are ways that we can come together as a community and just be like, are you doing good? Are you doing the things that you said? Can I keep you accountable? Those are important, those are great. But we also need to be able to come to each other as a community and volunteer our struggles, to be vulnerable. Having a community like this, where we are working together with the Spirit to reflect the character of God, is powerful. And knowing the power of a community like this, Peter reminds them. In verse 9, he says, "Do not pay back evil for evil or insult for insult. Instead, give blessing in return. You were called to do this so that you might inherit a blessing." Now, Torah allowed for response in kind. So Jewish cultural history, it was okay. It was eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You've probably heard that saying. That comes from Scripture. Torah allowed for response in kind. Our culture today, where we live in America, allows for response in kind. It is in our nature to want to have that eye for an eye. But the inheritance of this people, the inheritance in this room, comes not from the world, but from Jesus, who commanded and lived in an entirely different way. Our desire to match evil for evil and insult for insult, eye for an eye, at its core is good. There's a hunger and a thirst for justice, for things to be right in the world. A hunger to see the ways that things continue to break and not work, relationships, our relationship with the earth, to come to an end. When we see people in the earth being consumed and abused, we know that's not right. The trials and sufferings we experience today are evidence that Jesus has not yet returned, and the world is not yet made right. But our inheritance does not come from the world. It comes through what God did through Jesus, what Jesus accomplished. Jesus, who lived differently, as Peter said, who, when he was insulted, he did not reply with insults. When he suffered, he did not threaten revenge. He entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. Peter calls us again to honor everyone, to love the family of believers, and to fear God as the one who judges justly. Fear is always one of those words where it feels hard to me to apply to God. I want to love God. I want God to be my friend. He's kind to me. He's a great father. There's these ways that I see God, and he is warm and opening and hospitable and welcoming, and all of that is true. But the fear of God is to entrust ourselves to his justice. It is to acknowledge and entrust ourselves to the one who judges justly. It is to trust God's justice over man's. And Peter goes on to say, for those who want to love life and see good days. Now, this is a quote from Psalm 34, and David is writing. He's actually, I think he faked being crazy and got out of a bad situation. And so he's writing, and he starts it before this section that Peter quotes. It starts with, and they would know this, "Come, my children, listen to me, and I will teach you the fear of the Lord." This is something that he knows that we as children need to grasp, the fear of the Lord. And he says, for those who want to love life and see good days, you should keep your tongue from evil, For those who want to love life and see good days, keep their tongue from evil speaking and their lips from speaking lies. They should shun evil and do good, seek peace and chase after it. The Lord's eyes are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. Who is going to harm you if you are eager to do good? But happy are you even if you suffer because of righteousness. Don't be terrified or upset by them. How does David teach us to fear the Lord? He calls us to resist evil and to chase after peace. Resist evil, chase after peace. This helps us to develop our fear of the Lord. He calls us to resist, to trust what God sees and hears, to trust God's justice. And his justice, again, through faith in Jesus, is strangely wrapped in grace. We do not need to be afraid of man. We honor everyone. We fear God. Instead, regard Christ the Lord as holy in your hearts. Whenever anyone asks you to speak of your hope, be ready to defend it. Yet do this with respectful humility, maintaining a good conscience. Focus on Christ as the character of God that is in our hearts. To suffer because of righteousness is a witness to the character of God. Now, humility in the Greco-Roman world meant actually your inability to defend yourself. So it's not a nice term, humility. It means that you're weak. And yet Peter calls us to this very thing, and to do it with humility. So when you talk about the grace of God and you witness to why you can trust in his justice, do it knowing that God is your defense. God is who defends you, and Christ is your strength. Trust in the one who judges justly. That is the fear of the Lord. So in this next section of Peter, theologians have wrestled mightily, including Martin Luther, which I found fascinating. It's been through the ages, people have wondered, what is Peter getting at? Part of that is because there was early church canon that Peter is pulling on, that is known that Peter is pulling on, but that's not passages that we continue to use today. So it gets a little difficult to translate. I am not going to debate what the theologians said. But what I will do is talk about what Peter is getting at based on the larger context of his letter, which we all know. Christ himself suffered on account of sins once and for all, the righteous one on behalf of the unrighteous. He did this in order to bring you into the presence of God. Christ was put to death as a human, but made alive by the Spirit. Christ's suffering is the way for people to have access to God. Peter goes on to talk about Noah and baptism. What he's doing here is building the bigger picture. Remember when he references Abraham, and he reminds us that this has been a plan since the very beginning. He's bringing Noah in, and he's bringing the practice of baptism that they know today. Peter is reinforcing parallels from the time of Noah to what they are actually experiencing today, what we are experiencing today. We are a witnessing community. Noah's family, a witnessing community. They are suffering, and they are also certain that a day of judgment will come. Noah, they were suffering. The world was evil, and God told them judgment is coming. Ultimately, a family is saved. Our family has been saved because of their belief in God, because of our belief in God. And like baptism, it is a mark of your faith in what you believe God can do and who God is. Your salvation comes through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who is at God's right side. Now that he has gone into heaven, he rules over all angels, authorities, and powers. Again, Christ's suffering is the way for people to have access to God. Our suffering, our submitting for doing good, the ways that we hunger and thirst for justice, these are a witness to who God is. Christ has the power, he has the authority, God judges justly, and we as a family together bear witness when we suffer and submit by doing good. Peter is going to go ahead and when we read next week and the week after, Peter's not stopping on this. This is the point. This is what he's getting at. So we're going to spend more time this week in sorting out, what does it look like to submit by doing good? What do we need in our hearts? How do we need to view God? What does it look like to fear God and not man? So this week, we're going to look for opportunities to reflect what we know is true of God, to show the value of others as God values them, and to trust God as judge. At those times when it starts to feel hard to honor someone, will you ask yourself, God, take 5 seconds and pray a prayer of sincerity and say, God, I don't want to honor this person. They're so irritating. Okay? Because really, you guys, I'm not the only one, right? People get cranky. When you have a time where you feel most dependent on man's fairness and man's justice, will you stop and say, God, I have to see your justice and your power in this moment. Help me to not fear man. Let's commit together as a family, okay? So as you talk to each other throughout the week, or if you don't talk to each other throughout the week, call somebody this week, drop them an email, you can text, and say, how are you doing? What have you learned? What is the struggle? How can I encourage you? Or maybe say, I am struggling with honoring this person right now. Help. Can we trust each other to grow as a community this way? Does this feel scary to anybody? Does it feel exciting? Does it feel easy peasy? You're already doing it. Jen, you're way behind the curve. Whatever it is for you, if this is old hat for you, and you regularly stop and say, God, what is the word that you have for me for this person today? Then be an encouragement to others. Share your testimony. Share how God is working in your life. Share those crazy funny stories that you're like, I don't know what the fruit of this will be. But this person, a friend, came last week to church that I made the day before. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what God is doing in her life, and I don't know if I'll ever see her again. But it was a moment where I could show her the value that God has of her and trust that God would do that here too. Okay? So let me pray, and I'm excited because next week, when we come back, we're going to share. Okay? So just a warning. You could write it on a piece of paper if you want, but I need to know. I need your help to know what it is to follow God in this world today in the different places that we inhabit. Cool? Okay, let me pray. God, we hunger for you. We hunger for this world to be made right. We know that sometimes we depend on our own justice and our own ways of thinking, and yet we long to put on your heart, on your mind, the way that you did not return insult for insult or threat for revenge. So Jesus, help us to walk faithfully, to be a peculiar people this week, to dive into the joy of what it is to experience you in a new way, and to test and see, God, that you do lots around us every moment. Help us to be people who see and hear and know, God, where you're at work. We give you our heart, our mind, and our bodies for your purpose. Amen.